I wanted to mention to you, um, there are a lot of projects now dealing with visual culture that kind of bring together aesthetic and political concerns, as well as things like preservation. And as you know, we're living in, I'll just say, challenged times for all of this. One of these projects is called the Living New Deal, and two people are on the board of the Living New Deal. So Jackie Francis, who just spoke, and Erica Doss, who spoke earlier today, are both here. There have been a lot of funding challenges for that project, as well as for many others. And I just thought that as we circulate over the next evening and day, it might be something that you all would want to talk about, because it's a really critical issue, and it brings what really prompted me or galvanized me was Jackie's comment that we all need to be, if you will, as deeply engaged with visual culture as we do with musical culture. And my whole thing in life is that everything you see tells you something, and that visual culture is absolutely fundamental. And either blissfully or regrettably, this very bizarre moment in history is just reinforcing that notion, as we're told not only what perspective to think about, but what aesthetic and subject matter is within that prescribed canon. Anyway, wanted to call that out, and it seemed like an appropriate point in the program to do so because the sort of last formal segment of today's program is a conversation about installation and reinstallation, particularly with regard to American galleries, American art in museums. And I am going to just give you names and titles, and they're going to take over because they are actually talking about their work with regard to this subject at their institutions or where they've been. So, our moderator is Bob Cozzolino, and we have a very deep and warm place for Bob, who actually we started talking about this with him, and he has now agreed to be the moderator so that we do not lose the talk for tomorrow. Um, and he will be in conversation with Stephanie Sparling Williams, who is the Mellon Curator of American Art at the Brooklyn Museum, which there has just been a major reopening, if you will, of the reinstalled galleries. And then also Dakota Hoska. Some of you may remember her from previous conferences, but I'm thrilled for her, and actually for all of us, that she is the first curator of Native American art at the National Gallery. And she will be reflecting on prior periods, but nonetheless, it's really fantastic news. And so please join them. I think this is going to be really amazing.
Oh, I can rove with this. It's too bad, but there's no harness and I can't fly over the audience. Well, we'll see. Thank you for staying. And last time I was in this, well, the first time, which was last year, I was last towards the program. I made everybody stand up and shake. You might want to do that. I don't know. Get up, move your body a little bit, because you've been sitting there all day long. You've been listening to these wonderful. Erica Doss does not want to do this. She's refusing. Okay, well, free to be you and me. You do what you want.
Chickens.
Lisa's already introduced
Wiggle.
my colleagues here. And really, this is meant to be a conversation between the three of us about what drove and motivated the reinstallations at their respective institutions. Stephanie at the Brooklyn Museum and Dakota at the Denver Art Museum before she left to join the National Gallery. I've admired Stephanie's work from afar. I've worked with Dakota before, including a reinstallation at the Minneapolis Institute of Art that I did before I left. And so there's a lot to dig into here, and also a lot, I think, to talk about with regard to not only their specific motivations and their institutional culture, but also why do this now and why it matters to do this now. So we're going to start first with remarks, and each one of my colleagues are going to show you, kind of give you a sense of what their installations are like, and then we'll reconvene back here at this table and have a conversation. So first up is Stephanie.
Thank you. Is there a
Use the
clicker?
podium, or
Is it okay if I sit here? Can you all hear me? Okay, I was encouraged to make it conversational, so I'm gonna just speak for about 5 to 10 minutes to introduce you all to the Brooklyn Museum's Transformed American Art Wing, which we opened October 4th of last year. How many people have been to the Brooklyn Museum recently? Most folks? Okay, excellent. So we undertook a massive transformation of our fifth floor American Art Wing galleries. And, I'm excited for this conversation because we were really thinking about this question: how might American art be experienced today in this moment? Many of you may or may not know that Brooklyn Museum actually enjoys one of the most diverse local audiences in the world. We do get a lot of tourism, but largely we serve Brooklyn, and we always have. This reinstallation came about on the 200th year anniversary of the institution's founding. And it was a really great opportunity to build into, lean into, and amplify and move through that legacy of art for social improvement, which was our founding ethos. Thinking about this moment, we have an incredible American art collection, as those in this room will know. But the sad truth is, it's hasn't gotten the attention it deserves in the last decade or so. I would say the galleries have kind of grown a bit sleepy. There's been a lot of curatorial transitions, but I also just think that our audiences have been super generous and super engaged with their feedback. And I think the American Art Galleries, is the ways that they've been presented, in the last decade or so, have just underwhelmed our communities. And I think, we've taken a lot of pains to get feedback. Out of this momentum in the last 5 years, certainly, we've really been strategic about responding to the language of political and social demand. So our audiences have been really craving new experiences with our collection. And so what you'll see when you go into the institution is an experiment, right? A set of experiments. We largely reframe 2,000 years of hemispheric history of American art through the North American hemisphere, North and South American hemispheres, and we are really focused on how might American art be experienced in this moment, and each individual gallery is a distinct answer to that question. And so we're using frameworks as our guiding kind of principle for how the collection is organized. And each framework is really inspired by BIPOC and Black feminist lenses onto the collection. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that in depth. But I also, think it's important to recognize that American art has always been organized according to frameworks. They're usually chronology. They're usually frameworks of the nation. I think frameworks we take for granted. The nation itself is a framework. And when I say framework, I'm really thinking about the ways we organize ideas and actions. That's, kind of what, in my definition of a framework, I'm understanding a set of ideas and a set of actions. And we've always thought of the nation, those ideas about citizenship, those ideas about national borders, those ideas about culture and language and shared kind of experiences, and the actions that have fueled, a largely American art history and culture, have come to define, independence, revolution, ideas about freedom, forced migration, genocide, enslavement. Those are actions that have fueled manifest destiny, westward expansion. But I think we take for granted as those are the only frameworks that we have in American history and in American art. And so what you'll see at the Brooklyn Museum is an an opportunity to explore other possible frameworks. There are 8 galleries that you'll experience. I'm only going to share about 4 of them. I was asked to share a before and after image, the galleries before we transform them, and then what you'll experience when you go. And for everyone that I'm going to show, just know that each framework that we selected, there were about 10 others we could have selected. And that was, that was an intentional model that we wanted to build because we wanted the opportunity to respond, to continue to respond with the collection. We wanted to prove that American art is a living, breathing, history, and that this history is, we can create these bridges, right, between our historic collection and our contemporary audiences that doesn't always rely on contemporary art, right? But rather explore contemporary curatorial practice. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about that. Happy to answer questions, but I'm just going to slide through some of these before and after photographs. I think I covered most of the bases on the big topics. So this was our lobby gallery. My colleagues did a lot of really great work to think about land and where we stood in Brooklyn. This was a pandemic effort to think about land acknowledgement. It was always meant to be a temporary site until the museum had a more permanent location for land acknowledgement in our permanent collection, in our lobby space. So recognizing that the land that we stand on was not only kind of speaking to American history, but also the collection and the building itself. So this was what you saw when you went last year this time. This is what you would have seen. And this is the transformed lobby space. This was a design collaborative by Black Market Vintage, which is a design duo, Brooklyn-based design duo, who specialize in kind of Black vintage goods, homewares, ephemera. And so this is a lot of their inventory. And so they created this space. I was really wanting it to feel like a vibe. And I wanted people to feel at home when they walked into the galleries. I wanted it to be a space where people felt like they can sit down, hang out, chill out, and just be welcome. I wanted it to feel like Brooklyn, like if Brooklyn's living room. This was our early American galleries, a lot of our colonial portraits, a lot of our late 18th, early 19th century works. And now this space is dedicated to the framework Radical Care, which is looking at land, our relationship to place, a sense of place through 3 Indigenous and African diaspora epistemologies. So thinking through the ideas of rematriation, gratitude, and Sankofa, which is looking at the past, looking back in order to look forward. From this location, we explore this idea of place. And I'm happy to talk about that structure in the center if we have time. This was our kind of Hudson River School gallery. It was our paintings gallery. We had some of our most iconic landscapes on view in this space. And we transformed it into the framework to give flowers. This was the kind of OG framework, the original framework. This was a framework that I've been thinking a lot about. It's kind of inspired by the Black American adage to give somebody their flowers, which really comes out of the Black funerary tradition post-Reconstruction. I'm happy to talk about that legacy and what it means to kind of acknowledge somebody while they're still here with us. I really felt it was important. Also, a plug in the bibliography, I include the catalog, which just came out this week. I hope you all will go. If you order it from the Brooklyn Museum's website, we will send it to your door. So you don't even have to go to Brooklyn to get it. So I highly recommend it. But in the curatorial essay, I talk a lot about what it means to kind of cultivate a sense of belonging in these spaces. And also the idea of toward joy, where do we turn when we turn away from white supremacy? For me, was looking to Black communities of color, how they cultivated and experienced creative agency and joy in the midst of all of these complex histories. So joy kind of came this goalpost for the, I wanted audiences to experience embodied joy, curiosity when they came into these spaces. I really wanted to think about the architecture. I really wanted to think about the embodied, what design does to the body, and how we can experience joy, playfulness with these incredible collections. This wallpaper we borrowed it from Sam. This is in their collection, a Lois Maylou Jones design swatch for Cretone that they allowed us to reproduce. So thanks, Sam. The last framework that I'll share with you is counterparts. This framework, we're really thinking about achromaticity. There are two historical precedents, both coming out of Black arts curation, to think about how to bring together previously segregated artworks. So this gallery, we're thinking about this idea of black and white, and what achromaticity allows us to do, which it just, the hot take is it allows us to suspend difference and heighten similarities. So this is a formal conversation in this gallery, some really exciting discoveries. There are about 120 works in the whole entire installation that have never been on view before. We did just do our first rotation 2 weeks ago. And we're really excited for the galleries to continue to live and breathe. But those are some four frameworks that I chose. There are 4 that you didn't see. So if you haven't gone to the museum, I highly encourage you to get there. Oh, you have your. Oh, I did another one. Oops. We don't have to talk about that one.
No, do it. Go
Please
for it.
talk
I
about
have a
it.
lot of slides, so go for it so I don't feel so lopsided.
I feel like I forgot. Maybe my assistant put those in there just for fun. But several seats. We're thinking about drag. We're thinking about self-fashioning. The admonition, or like kind of the rebuke, take several seats or have several seats, meaning like you're taking up too much space. Like please sit down. Like give somebody else an opportunity. So we took our really important collection of early American portraits. I had no interest in putting them into storage. Instead, we focused on seated portraits in the collection, and we lowered them. We hung them below the sight line as a way to rethink the power dynamics. A lot of people gave us feedback. Our early American portraits, they were curious, like, who are these people? Why do they get to be on the walls? And what is the sea of white faces that I have to like travel through in order to get to all our special exhibitions? So we repositioned these portraits in another gallery, but then we also designed the space so that visitors could kind of choose their experience. They could walk alongside the portraits and look down, which, spoiler alert, you actually can see them better. There's no glare on the glaze, and people who have mobility issues or just shorter stature actually have easier access to the paintings. Surprise, surprise. So, but you can look down on them instead of look up, which changes the power dynamic, which we're really interested in. The New York City park benches, which are kind of a symbol of the democratization of public space. They're also in the collection and a wreck. We refurbished them so they look as beautiful as they do, and we've put them in the galleries as gallery seating, and visitors can choose which way they orient themselves in relationship to the portraits. Of course, we have an incredible furniture collection, American furniture collection, and so we've actually put seats, several of them, on view in this really cool display that my colleagues from Decorative Arts worked on, thinking about the value and materials. And then, of course, we have this really fun runway, and people do actually strut down it. And that, I have a really, there's a fun story for how that came to be, but we really wanted to celebrate and create opportunities for audience members to take up space in the galleries and play. And the portraits, like, really great seated audience for that. So this was our final gallery. If you complete the donut or the loop, as it were, most of our modern and contemporary works were in this space. And we transformed it into this space that was Witness. This came out of a workshop that I did with my colleagues in education and public programs. I asked them, how do you use these spaces? What do you teach from? What galleries do you spend the most time in? And people repeatedly said that they spend the most time in this gallery. And I was like, oh, that's because all the contemporary art's there, right? So fun. And they're like, no, actually, it has nothing to do with the art on view. Actually, it has everything to do with the acoustics. So we do all of our spoken word, we do our teacher trainings, we do all of the, major programs in this space because it has the largest floor space and the best acoustics. Please do not put anything in the middle of the floor. And so I wanted to amplify that work. And so we actually built a stage for programming that has been programmed nearly every weekend since we've opened. It's been really exciting. There's AV capability, but then also audience members can decide what they might want to witness. So from Shirley Chisholm, Marina Tallchief, we've got the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, cherry blossoms blooming, the Mermaid Parade in Brooklyn, Biggie rapping on a street corner, you name it. People come in here and they create their own sight lines, further blurring the line between the collection and our contemporary audiences. And you'll notice that when you get in that space, all the gazes of the portraits are directed towards the stage and towards the audience itself. So it's about being seen and it's about seeing. And witness is kind of being accountable to what you see, and it's a deep and meaningful. It resonates deep and meaningfully in the Black American community in particular. And there's a lot of layers to that, but I think the idea of witnessing, bearing witness, creating a forum for public performance is really important part of that American history. Now I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I think I am going to stand up just because I'm having trouble turning. Okay, so as Bob and Lisa mentioned, I was recently at the Denver Art Museum, and the Denver Art Museum has a great focus on Indigenous art. It's really one of its cornerstones of its collection. And so it has about 18,000 objects in the collection that we could work with in 20,000 square feet. So I have a few more slides, but I'll try to blast through them. We have 2 floors. So on one floor, we have the artwork from the Northwest Coast and Alaskan Native work. And then we have an upper level that houses everything else. And then we have an artist in residence space. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our homeland section, which was an homage to the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people of, who call the area of Denver and the surrounding Colorado area their homelands. All right. And that's the end of my slides. Hello, Mr. Tech Man. I'll try one more time since you're close. Oh. Well, there you go. Sorry. Okay. So we had a couple of goals, and one was that we wanted to, it's not an American art collection. What I worked on was specifically indigenous nations from North America. And some of our goals were we wanted to dispel this myth of authenticity. So kind of dispel this idea that there is an authentic Native artwork before colonization and then everything else has been tainted. We really wanted to talk about how Indigenous people were early adapters for different materials and technologies all throughout time. We wanted to elevate Indigenous voices through different ways that they got the chance to express themselves, and also by choosing stories that really elevated their histories. We combined the historic with the contemporary all throughout the galleries. We really wanted to surprise audiences. I think we wanted to surprise them through the work. So what they thought they knew about Indigenous art and Indigenous people through the artwork. And we wanted to show the great variety of Native people on this continent and the great depth of not only knowledge, but just the sheer enormity of this continent and how all those different lifeways could be, so variable. And we didn't want to look like anthropological. We really wanted to talk about the fact that Indigenous people are contemporary at every moment in time. And so we really tried to shake up viewers' ideas of what to expect when they came to the galleries. And so I think one of the directives that we gave to the design team was, we really want our spaces to look like Indigenous, like an Indigenous contemporary art gallery. So this was our Northwest Coast space. And this actually kind of happened, the reinstall of this happened kind of before I got there. So I came in at the tail end. So this is how it was. And this is what it ended up being. Our director wanted to have our permanent gallery spaces to be as interesting as a special exhibition. So there was more theatrics that went into play in the galleries. These are just other angles of that. I don't know if you noticed that those house posts and memorial posts were pushed up against the wall. Here's contemporary and historic works with a lot of video. We had a lot of multimedia elements. And then when you move into like the Alaskan Native, it's kind of great to be in this space because you kind of see how an environment really changes the aesthetic that gets developed by a people. And so, you know, the Northwest Coast, they are rich, right? They've got trees and they've got fish and water and you know, every kind of resource. And then in the Alaskan Native, in this harsh environment, you know, the artwork gets scaled down. And then we moved to the upstairs floor. And this is what it used to be. And you're going to see, like here, whoop, where's my pointer? It's way over there. I don't know how to get it here. But when we get to the next side, you'll see here is Mud Woman. So that'll kind of orient you as we're going through. But there was just a lot of tan and beige going on in these spaces. It was really, I don't know, I like to call that color buckskin. And, you know, like we're all riding our horses out on the plains in this buckskin color. But this is what it looked like right after the installation. And I say was because right before I left, I reinstalled too. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But so this is Mud Woman where I pointed it out. And this is behind, like that group of shelves that you saw with all the pots. So really, we were talking about, in this place, we were talking about like the family, the legacy of the Naranjo family. And Mud Woman was made by Roxanne Swensel, and these are all Naranjo family members shown on this group of risers. And we had a space towards the back, and you'll notice this platform was really hard to curate. I mean, it was kind of goofy. They made us keep the platforms because they were only like 10 or 11 years old. So we had to work around those, but you'll kind of see what we did. So now this corner edge is what you're looking at when you go, so when you're facing that, that's the corner edge, and we built this up. And then that's that platform. And in order to create more wall space, we added those walls, and then we actually hollowed out behind where that platform was. So we had to keep the platforms, but we cut them all up anyway. And we made this like space, this contemplative space where people could reflect on their experiences, because sometimes Indigenous artwork, you know, it can be, there's hard histories when you're looking at our artworks, and the artists are really addressing that. So it can be painful and overwhelming. And some of those histories are just either still happening or they're just 1 or 2 generations away. So, you know, where the cross-like figure was, this is looking back now through the gallery, and you can see the Naranjo family stuff. And then I'm going to point out this area here. So this is a door, another door that leads out to the elevator. And we really wanted to have something that honored the people from that land. And so what we did was we built like a circular structure there, and we created, for the first time, we created something that was called Homelands. And it was really meant to uplift the voices of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. And so that's what that space ended up being like. That was a community collaboration. We worked with people from those communities to kind of say, like, how would you like to be represented and honored in this space? And what you can't tell is behind these cradle boards, there's also films of community members speaking. And then we have these large banners that show contemporary pictures of the people from those communities. And then you walk out into that space, and we thought it was super important to have a contemporary piece right there. And now this section that I'm going to talk to you about, it's kind of allocated by regions. And we really had a lot of discussions around that, because that gets problematic in some ways, because, you know, it kind of assumes that one artist can represent the artwork of a region when artists have agency and they're just speaking for themselves. But there also are similarities within different regions because of the materials, but also just the ceremonies and things like that. So, you know, we really tried to approach that in a good way. So from that sculpture, if you look to the right, you see the southwest area. And then behind that sculpture is the California area. And so you can see again this combination of the historic with the contemporary. And to the left, you see this woodland section. And one way we kind of tried to undermine this idea of the regions was to have these cutouts so people could see. So the idea was anywhere you stood within the gallery spaces, you'd catch a glimpse of another region from where you were to kind of pull you forward into the space and help you realize the breadth of the continent and the visual culture. This is an old picture looking at those same platforms and looking at the back. There was one space for a teepee. I never like to show a teepee because I feel like, oh, it's just like the most obvious thing, even though I like to live in a teepee, but I don't like to show them. So these are those same platforms from a different angle looking back towards them. And this is where the teepee was. And then just quickly, I said I reinstalled. So 2025 marks the 100-year anniversary of the Denver Art Museum collecting Native art. But that's a goofy anniversary, right? So like it means a lot for an institution, but not so much for Native people who've been here for 45,000 years. So how do you like bridge that gap? And so we worked with, we collaborated with 7 community members to kind of come up with a theme that would be honoring the community. And they really wanted to talk about the things that have sustained them over time. So this is that same platform where those Rose Simpson sculptures were of the people, and you see Mud Woman behind. And they wanted to talk about one of the things sustaining them was beauty. So this is a section on beauty, and that's like facing the other way. So again, you see the contemporary with the historic, and in the background where there was that figure, that cross-like figure, you see a new work from Terry Greaves, a new beaded work. And then you go around the corner to talk about our connections. And then you have these reasons within connections why we gather. We gather to come together to play games. So we've got this contemporary piece by Tom Jones, and then a whole section of games. And then spirituality, and that was our third section of the reinstallation. And this reinstallation was about 8,000 square feet. Okay, so yeah, really we just wanted to reinforce the ideas of Indigenous people as living sovereign nations now and into the future, shake up visitor expectations and preconceived notions about what is Native art, provide a venue for Native American voice and opinion, and share curatorial authority. There's a lot of special programs like our Voices program and stuff, but we can do all that in the conversation and really tell stories that people will remember and that really uplift our shared humanity. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dakota. I'm not sure how much time we have, but I wanted to, there's a lot of things that were interesting overlaps in what you both presented. And one of the things that you touched on, Dakota, but I'd like to hear you speak to it, Stephanie, is that, you know, you mentioned that for the Brooklyn Art Museum, there's an extremely diverse audience that's local. And one of the challenges always for museums is how are you constantly getting that audience that's right there in your backyard to come in again and again to look at what is just on site rather than the special exhibition. And was there conversation in either one of those institutions while you were working on this about trying to craft these permanent collection installations in such a way that you could convey to your audience that they're going to be changed, they're going to be mutable, there's going to be something offered that's slightly different, because you mentioned the word responsive, that was kind of built into it. And, you know, it's too early to tell maybe, maybe you have some perspective on this, but um, is your audience giving you feedback or using those permanent collection galleries differently? Are they reacting differently to the museums because of that changed feeling in the spaces and that sense that it might be different next time? So keep coming back. It's right there.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and there are a couple of things at play. So the collection itself over its history, and I talk a little bit about this in the catalog essay, was a destination for American art. And I think now we've kind of become a destination for special exhibitions or blockbuster exhibitions, which is great. But I think our permanent collection then kind of, you know, is becomes under recognized in that ecosystem. But I do think that the reinstallation has created, one of our goals was to make the galleries kind of a destination for American art again. And there are a couple things that we can see since opening that's kind of happening. So one of the goals, one of the tangible ways that we worked toward this was just made it impossible to see everything in one visit. Made it so overwhelming, and we wanted it to feel like, oh my God, I have to come back. And oh my God, I have to bring my friend, or I have to, this would be a fun date. And all the ways that our visitors are already visiting the museum, but wanting to make sure to stop by the American galleries and even colleagues that came, dedicating an hour or two, and they're like, I couldn't see it all. And it's like, that's on purpose. We have an incredible collection, and still, less like 1% of it is on view, and 460 works are included in that space. And the last thing I'll say about that too, which was strategic, is we were really interested and inspired in this idea of an aesthetics of fullness. And so that is inspired a lot by the Black home, which I've written about, but also BIPOC homes in general. When we think about how Black and Brown families and communities have built spaces, it is decidedly like not the white cube, essentially, which is in and of itself a period room. And so I think thinking about what does fullness look and feel like what does it feel like to be in a space and not know it all and in one go. I think that that's a really important thing for curators to sit with when they're thinking about the collection. And then the last thing I'll say is polyvocality. There's a lot of people talking to you in the American art galleries. We were very committed to expanding the voices in our galleries. And it's not like curator and try to actually flatten or not flatten, but kind of undermine the hierarchies and that privilege curatorial voice and expertise over the voices of others. So we have some voices that you might hear in addition to artists and like local Brooklyn community thought partners. We have like our Brooklyn Botanic Garden colleagues who have provided interpretation of our floral gallery, specifically. We've had our conservators provide expertise in material histories and conditions. So in our To Give Flowers, talking about madder red, for example, coming out of a botanical specimen or to create this pigment. Thinking about water, the impacts of water on works on paper, but also that we can like wash works on paper, which I think audiences don't know about. So I think there are these drag queens, New York City drag queens are reading our portraits, thinking about self-fashioning. So there are all these different voices that you'll encounter, Indigenous community members and expertise and knowledge holders talking about the belongings that we have on view. So, those are just some of the ways that people, we are encouraging people to come back because it's like a place that you will become familiar with over time and peel back the layers. And we want them to feel like every single time you're kind of discovering new experiences.
I think that our plan, I know that our plan at reinstallation was to be able to be very responsive. And then we built, especially that upstairs section, that we could take out one whole story and replace one whole story very easily. So that was our plan. And so a way to keep it fresh, but really the logistics of that, like with what our reinstallation teams had to deal with at the museum, because other galleries also had done that, and suddenly there was this huge draw on our resources to make these changeovers. So that didn't work out quite the way we wanted it to. But I would kind of say that I think having a place that although I wasn't thinking about the home aesthetic when we were putting it together, I think having a place that does feel joyful, like I love how you are summing that up and doesn't feel scientific and it feels approachable on a lot of levels really help that. And I think having things like I had told you we had this Our Voices program where it's community members who are talking about the works or just having these like warm and welcoming colors, like you have too, instead of those white walls that make it feel just, pretty, cold and very I don't want to say unapproachable, but it's a different kind of vibe in this space. I do think that helps as far as like having people come back and also, making the galleries more like a special exhibition space. So often the permanent galleries in a lot of institutions just get kind of like overlooked and everything goes to those special exhibitions. So I think those things did make a difference.
And we noticed a huge difference in traffic too, like right away. So we know it's, at least for now, the buzz is working. I spent a lot of time in the galleries. It's hard for me to work in my desk. And so I would write a lot in the galleries when I was, doing research. And it was like a library. It was like so quiet and, people were tiptoeing around and, just kind of people were like, where's this, where's Spike Lee or where's, Dior or where's Terry Mugler? And you just see people beeline right through the galleries. And I'd just be sitting there. And now I can barely squeeze up in there. I schedule my tours with VIPs at very specific times because it's just so packed, which is a great problem to have. And so I do think it's working for now. For now, I think there's a lot of hype in buzz in this moment, and we'll see if we can sustain it. But I do think people want to be in spaces that feel warm. And, I love, that you said accessible because I think the ways we experience culture now too, I feel like, flipping on phones there, there's a lot of color, there's a lot of, and then you come into a space like a museum. And I think the intention is to allow people, more room to breathe and like to look. But I actually think sometimes it has the opposite effect, especially on the communities that we're trying to make feel more welcome and like they belong. So I think, we have to consider that as well.
I have a lot more questions that I'd like to discuss with these two folks, but I know we're almost out of time, and I just wanted to make sure that Lisa Singh, go ahead. Okay. Well, the one question I do want to make sure we touch on is the kind of work that you both have been doing and have done with these reinstallations. The kind of work that I've been interested in doing in museums and have been able to accomplish occasionally is about what you described very beautifully, which is looking at the past in order to move into the future and really learning from the past, often with artists, and thinking about what kind of a future do we want and how do we make that real and what kinds of actions need to take place in order to do that. And what you're both really doing is making sure that our histories are multivalent and they're polyphonic and they're really taking into account all of the different nuances of who we are and who we've been. And so right now that's really under threat. It's not under threat because I'm going to keep doing it, but definitely institutions are being scrutinized, funds are being pulled. All that kind of stuff is an existential threat to the kind of work that we want to do as cultural workers and as public museum people. And so I'm just curious to hear, if you feel comfortable talking about it, what you see as a path forward or how you're operating right now, considering this climate. And I'm not in an institution, so if you were like pass, that's fine.
No need to pass. I think, as an Americanist, as like an American cultural historian, it was always going to be a backlash, right? Like this moment that we're in was anticipated, by many of us, was expected, which is why I felt so determined to push as far and as hard as I could with this reinstallation. Thankfully, I've said it before, I don't think I could have pulled this off at any other institution, to be honest, other than the Brooklyn Museum, because we had a running start, in terms of our founding ethos and our mission, our programs, our history, our priorities, our mission and vision. It made it really, this made a lot of sense for us. And so, but I still, I pushed really, really hard, knowing that the window of opportunity was always going to be limited, was always going to close, right? And this is what I think we're seeing now. I'm just like so thankful we opened in October, even though I really don't think we would have, like about face, like I don't think we would have shifted priorities, but our institution, just like literally almost every New York public facing institution, is funds are being rescinded, but we also have supporters doubling down. I know the Met just experienced their most profitable gala just a couple days ago. The Brooklyn Museum just had our most, profitable fundraising effort. I think people, I mean, I hate that it's private individuals who are coming to the aid of these cultural institutions, but I think we are in the midst of a particular cultural war that we can look back and see how it ends, and I think, I think we're just, don't panic, like calmly grab your oxygen mask and, put it over your face first. And I think, there's a playbook to this. American history is very good at repeating. And so I think hopefully we fail forward in this moment like we have in the past.
Yeah, my colleague Angela Two Stars in Minneapolis, she's a curator and she runs all my relations gallery there. And the day after the election, we had a meeting with Public Art St. Paul because she and I are doing a triennial together. And the head asked how we were doing, and Angela said, "I don't know. It's been worse." It's a long history, and I thought that was a very clear-headed perspective on things.
I have a couple of things that just really give me hope. And one is that, like, I feel supported by the institution, and I know the Dam is supporting like they just opened also the Kent Monkman show, and he's a two-spirit artist. So I think that these institutions kind of know what's happening. But the other thing is the public was hungry for this. I know when we did our reinstallation, both John Lukovic was my colleague at the Dam. We were writing these labels and we're like, oh dang, I will hope we don't get in trouble for this, or maybe Christoph's going to fire us, because we just did truth telling, and people loved it. They were ready for it. They were hungry for it. They, I think that all of us also feel isolated when somebody tries to separate us the way that Voldemort is trying to separate us in these times, and we want to stay together. We want to have appreciation for each other, and that gives me hope. And I will say, like, I love Stephanie's, the founding principle of joy under that, like that was a great reminder for me as I was looking at your slides, like, oh yeah, I think I also personally get caught up because the history of my people is real, and sometimes I forget all the joy that happened, even in the middle of an apocalypse. So I just think focusing on joy, reminding ourselves that we actually really do like each other, and a lot of what we hear is not true. And yeah, these institutions that step up. And I want to say one more thing. I think it's a wave, and I just don't think people can stop a wave. So it's like the Grinch, we still have to sing Merry Christmas even after all the toys are gone.
Okay, well, thank you both of you for your work and for sharing your thoughts today.
People loved it. You wanted to go home and write.
Well,
choice, a cheerful one like Thomas the